The story begins by showing a young man named Woo Hyun who wakes up and is surprised to find himself still alive. He glanced around the room and noticed a beautiful girl lying unconscious nearby. Curious, he approached her to check if she was okay. Unexpectedly, the girl revealed to be an angel, equally shocked that Woo Hyun could see her. As they spoke, Woo Hyun learned the angel was more worried about finding her lost death book than her own safety. When Woo Hyun asked for her contact information outside the hospital, she simply pointed to the sky, saying it was her home. Confused, Woo Hyun struggled to understand how someone could live in the sky. While looking across the street, the angel saw another angel escorting an elderly man to the afterlife. She called out to him and explained her situation, where she had saved Woo Hyun's life but lost her death book in the process. The male angel was alarmed, knowing the severe consequences of losing such an important item. Determined to help, Woo Hyun took the angel to the police station. Unfortunately, she couldn't remember anything about herself, not her name, address, or date of birth. Later, Woo Hyun visited an office and met Woo Jin, who praised him for assisting a man who had fainted earlier. When Woo Jin asked the angel for her name, she looked around, saw a bottle, and said her name was Lee Seul. Glancing at a magazine, she added the surname Bai, introducing herself as Lee Seul-bi. As they were about to leave, Seul-bi suddenly grabbed his hand. At the same time, Jin Young's mother arrived with a teacher, accusing Woo Hyun of driving her son to attempt the unthinkable. Fortunately, Woo Jin stepped in to calm the situation, urging her to handle the matter peacefully. Moments later, Seul-bi abruptly accused Jin Young's mother of being a poor parent and claimed she saw Woo Hyun helping Jin Young earlier. Embarrassed by her bluntness, Woo Hyun hurriedly led her outside. In the end, despite Woo Jin's efforts to mediate, Jin Young's mother insisted on suing Woo Hyun. Later, that evening, Woo Hyun's grandmother sat counting her earnings while Seul-bi sat beside her, wearing the grandmother's clothes. Woo Hyun arrived home, and his grandmother handed him his shoes from his father. Reluctantly, Woo Hyun gave them to Seul-bi, who gratefully accepted them. Seul-bi's innocent questions disrupted the mood. She asked if the gift came from Woo Hyun's father in America and where his mother was. Woo Hyun's expression darkened, and his grandmother quickly changed the topic, telling him to rest since it was late. Before leaving, Seul-bi offered Woo Hyun a pillow and asked to sleep together, which Woo Hyun firmly declined, feeling it was inappropriate. After Woo Hyun left, his grandmother warned Seul-bi never to bring up Woo Hyun's mother again or risk being thrown out. Meanwhile, Woo Hyun sneaked out late at night to meet Jin Young. At that moment, Jin Young apologized for her mother's earlier behavior and promised to stay away to protect Woo Hyun from expulsion. As Woo Hyun prepared to leave, Jin Young grabbed his hand and hugged him, vowing to shield him from her mother. Unbeknownst to them, Seul-bi had followed Woo Hyun and was watching from behind a tree. Woo Hyun noticed her and called out, asking Jin Young to leave because his girlfriend had arrived. He gently released Jin Young and embraced Seul-bi, then urged her to leave with him. The next day, Jin Young's mother arrived at school with a letter demanding Woo Hyun's immediate transfer. She claimed his presence would ruin her daughter's grades. Woo Hyun confronted her, asking why she wanted him to leave. Jin Young's mother then accused him of meeting Jin Young the previous night. Fortunately, Seul-bi stepped in, explaining it was Jin Young who had called Woo Hyun. Despite Woo Hyun's attempts to stop her, Jin Young's mother threatened to sue him for 10 million won if he didn't leave. At the same time, Woo Hyun's grandmother refusing to back down, she grabbed a spatula and chased Jin Young's mother out. Not wanting to be left out, Seul-bi found an even bigger spatula and joined the chase. Angry at Seul-bi's interference, Woo Hyun dragged her outside, holding her hand tightly. He told her that he didn't want her help and asked Seul-bi to leave him alone. Upset, Seul-bi explained that she only wanted to protect him from Jin Young's mother. Woo Hyun, however, insisted he would leave if she didn't stop meddling. In the end, Seul-bi stayed silent and watched him walk away. Alone and unsure of what to do, Seul-bi wandered the streets. Back home, Woo Hyun angrily threw away her clothes. As night fell, Seul-bi searched through trash bins for food. At one moment, she found a broken doll and felt a connection to it, both of them abandoned and unwanted. When rain suddenly started, Seul-bi sought shelter, until she stumbled upon Sung-yeol eating noodles outside a convenience store. She stared at him, but he left, uncomfortable with her gaze. Feeling betrayed by Woo Hyun after saving his life, Seul-bi screamed in frustration. Wandering aimlessly, she spotted a speeding car. Thinking it might help her return to her angelic form, she stepped onto the road. At the last moment, Woo Hyun suddenly appeared and pulled her to safety. Furious at her reckless behavior, he scolded her. As Woo Hyun invited Seul-bi to walk with him, he realized she wasn't following and turned to find her still standing behind him. Slowly, his anger faded, and Seul-bi smiled as they walked together. The next day, Seul-bi showed up at school wearing Woo Hyun's uniform. Knowing this, Woo Hyun immediately asked Seul-bi to change, annoyed that she had kept it after he threw it away. However, Woo Hyun's grandmother intervened, giving them both money to buy new uniforms. Seul-bi was overjoyed, but Woo Hyun threatened not to buy her one if she didn't change out of his old clothes. Meanwhile, Sung-yeol was celebrating his birthday with his stepmother, Ji-hai, and his friend Woo-jin at a nearby cafe. However, Ji-hai is hesitated to give Sung-yeol a gift, fearing he wouldn't like it. Sung-yeol, indifferent, looked out the window until Woo Hyun and Seul-bi passed by. Seeing this, Ji-hai immediately turned away, worried that her students might recognize her as she is their teacher at school. At the same time, Sung-yeol felt uncomfortable, embarrassed to be seen with her. Sung-yeol abruptly left the cafe, followed by Ji-hai, who didn't care if people saw them together. Suddenly, a thief grabbed Ji-hai's bag and ran off. Seul-bi, without hesitation, chased the thief, with Woo Hyun following close behind. Soon after, they cornered the thief in an alley, but he grabbed a wooden block, ready to attack. Before he could strike, Seul-bi used her powers to stop him. Exhausted from using her powers, Seul-bi collapsed. Shortly after, Woo-jin also arrived to catch the thief. Sung-yeol, who had just reached the place, was shocked to see Seul-bi unconscious. At the same time, Woo Hyun tried to wake Seul-bi up but failed. In the end, Woo Hyun was forced to carry her home. The next day, Woo Hyun arrived at a new school and introduced himself to the class. The teacher asked him to sit next to Chun-sik, where Woo Hyun immediately greets him with a friendly high five, but Chun-sik hesitated, afraid of being targeted by Jae-suk and his gang. Seeing that Woo Hyun didn't make a fuss, Chun-sik quietly sat beside him. Later, one of Jae-suk's friends called Chun-sik to the bathroom. Reluctantly, Chun-sik followed. It turned out that in this school, anyone who sat next to a new student often became a target for bullying. While they were in the bathroom, water began flooding the floor. At the same time, Jae-suk cruelly ordered Chun-sik to step in the water to leave. Just then, Sung-yeol appeared and intervened. He reminded Jae-suk about the ethics class they were supposed to attend and the consequences of skipping it. In the end, Jae-suk left. Back in class, Chun-sik returned to his seat first, followed by Woo Hyun and the tardy Sung-yeol. The teacher, Ji-hai, was strict and ordered both latecomers to stand outside. While outside, Sung-yeol unexpectedly attacked Woo Hyun. Before Woo Hyun could respond, Ji-hai came out, furious at Sung-yeol's behavior. She slapped him and punished both by making them run laps around the field. During the run, Sung-yeol oddly asked Woo Hyun to hit him. Woo Hyun obliged, keeping the second punch as a souvenir. The next day was swimming class, but Woo Hyun, unable to swim, pretended to be sick. The teacher excused him, but assigned him to clean the pool later. Jae-suk, noticing Woo Hyun's discomfort around water, offered to help him clean. While Woo Hyun was near the pool, Jae-suk suddenly pushed him in. Laughing, Jae-suk watched Woo Hyun struggle to stay afloat. Things became serious when Woo Hyun started sinking. Fortunately, Seul-bi appeared just in time and jumped in to save him, but she too began to drown. Luckily, Sung-yeol was nearby and quickly rescued them both. The following day, Woo Hyun noticed his necklace was missing. He searched everywhere, including at school, but couldn't find it. Meanwhile, Woo Hyun's grandmother instructed Seul-bi to register for school. Later, at the police station, a mysterious man approached Seul-bi with an envelope containing updated documents. Though suspicious, she reluctantly accepted the papers, unsure of his true intentions. Back at school, Jae-suk left a drink on Woo-hyun's desk as an apology. However, Woo-hyun, still angry, called Jae-suk a coward. This sparked an argument that quickly escalated into a physical fight. Jae-suk grabbed Woo-hyun, and tensions ran high. Before the fight got worse, the teacher entered the room with Seul-bi. Spotting the commotion, Seul-bi didn't hesitate. She bit Jae-suk's hand to stop him. The teacher also intervened and asked Seul-bi to introduce herself to the class. Surprisingly, Seul-bi announced she and Woo-hyun were living together and requested to sit next to him. Later, during gym class, the girls were playing catch when one of them accidentally threw the ball too hard. It was heading straight for Seul-bi, but Woo-hyun appeared out of nowhere, catching the ball and pulling Seul-bi out of harm's way. Everyone watched in astonishment as he whisked her off to safety. After school, Seul-bi went straight to the swimming pool, determined to find the missing necklace. She searched quietly, hoping no one would notice her. Soon, Sung-yeol arrived and, seeing her there, asked why she was at the pool. When Seul-bi explained her reason, Sung-yeol decided to help. He fetched the pool key and suggested that she leave since she couldn't swim. Despite her hesitation, Seul-bi agreed and went home. Once Seul-bi left, Sung-yeol dived into the pool to search for the necklace. After a while, he successfully found it. Later that day, Ji-hai stopped by Sung-yeol's room with some food. Her eyes fell on the necklace, and she asked where it came from. Sung-yeol, sounding sarcastic, told her it belonged to a friend. Meanwhile, Woo-hyun went shopping with a friend. By chance, they bumped into Ji-hai, who was his teacher. As they were about to leave, Ji-hai followed Woo-hyun and ended up near his home. There, she spotted Woo-hyun's grandmother outside a shop. At that moment, Ji-hai realized that Woo-hyun was her son. As Seul-bi walked home, she was thrilled to have Woo-hyun's necklace in her hands. But her happiness didn't last. A cyclist coming from the opposite direction hit her, causing her to fall. The necklace slipped from her hand and rolled into a nearby gutter. Seul-bi tried to grab it, but just then, a man splashed water on her, pushing the necklace further away. Struggling to reach it, Seul-bi almost gave up until a male angel named Sun-bae appeared. With his help, she finally retrieved the necklace. As the evening set in, Seul-bi limped back home. Woo-hyun saw her and rushed over, alarmed by her condition. Not only that, he also scolded her, demanding to know where she had been. Despite his worry, Seul-bi smiled and showed him the necklace she had worked so hard to retrieve. Gently, she placed it around Woo-hyun's neck, leaving him both surprised and touched. From a distance, Sun-bae watched the moment between them. When Seul-bi noticed him, she ran towards him, but Sun-bae avoided her and disappeared before she could reach him. Woo-hyun soon approached looking confused. Seeing Sun-bae gone, he asked Seul-bi if her memory had returned, but she didn't respond until Seul-bi suddenly fainted in his arms. Woo-hyun then brought Seul-bi home and carefully tended to her. As she rested, Seul-bi teased Woo-hyun, saying he looked like a doctor. The next morning, Seul-bi felt much better and enjoyed the sunny weather. At that moment, Woo-hyun took out his cell phone and Seul-bi eagerly reached out, pleading for it. Amused, he handed it to Seul-bi, where she explored the phone excitedly and discovered the camera. Without hesitation, she snapped a picture of Woo-hyun. Annoyed, Woo-hyun asked her to delete it, but Seul-bi innocently said she wanted to keep it so she could look at him whenever he wasn't around. Touched by her words, Woo-hyun hugged her and suggested they take a picture together. In the end, the photo they're taken turned out perfectly. At lunchtime, Seul-bi sat with Woo-hyun and Ki-soo at their table. At one moment, Woo-hyun took a sip of the soup and frowned, noticing something unusual. Hearing this, Ki-soo explained that the menu had been changed from anchovy soup to crab soup without warning. At another table, Ji-hai sat with the music teacher and another female teacher, but her eyes were fixed on Woo-hyun. When the female teacher asked why she wasn't eating, Ji-hai suddenly felt unwell, and in the end she was rushed to the hospital. Shortly after, Ji-hai and Woo-hyun ended up in the same hospital room, but Woo-hyun's condition was clearly worse. Curious and worried, Ji-hai moved the curtain aside to take a closer look at his face. She couldn't shake the feeling that he might be her son, especially when she noticed they shared the same allergy. Suddenly, Seul-bi and Woo Hyun's grandmother burst into the room. At that moment, Woo Hyun's grandmother, visibly panicked, cried out that Woo Hyun must have inherited his allergy from that woman. Seul-bi tried to calm her down, sharing a story about one of her teachers who had a similar issue. Despite the commotion, Woo Hyun was conscious and eager to leave the hospital, expressing his strong dislike for being there. As they walked out, Ji-hai hid behind a nearby wall, watching them leave. Her heart was heavy, torn between her gut feeling and uncertainty about whether Woo Hyun was truly her son. The next day in class, Jae-suk and his group eagerly awaited Chun-sik. At one moment, Jae-suk tossed a book at Chun-sik, expecting him to catch it with his bag. If he missed, Jae-suk demanded Chun-sik pay him 10,000 won. Sensing the brewing trouble, Woo Hyun quickly pulled Seul-bi aside and told her to go outside with Chun-sik to avoid the situation. Just then, Sung-yeol entered the classroom. He slipped some money into Jae-suk's pocket and sarcastically suggested he use it to go clubbing. Furious, Jae-suk threw the money onto the floor. In a heated argument, Jae-suk accused Sung-yeol of abandoning him when he needed help the most. However, Sung-yeol coldly responded that Jae-suk should have let him die instead. Sung-yeol then yanked his hand away from Jae-suk's grip. Enraged, Jae-suk kicked Sung-yeol's locker, but their teacher caught him in the act. Later, while cleaning his wound in the restroom, Sung-yeol was approached by Woo Hyun. Concerned, Woo Hyun asked about the argument with Jae-suk and how he injured his hand. Sung-yeol, avoiding the question, left without answering. Meanwhile, in the teacher's office, Jae-suk was questioned about kicking Sung-yeol's locker. Before the conversation could go further, the phone rang. It was the math teacher requesting a USB drive with the exam questions. Moments later, the phone rang again. It was the chairman of the board with another urgent task. Overwhelmed, the teacher asked Suk-hoon to deliver the USB to the math teacher, letting Jae-suk off with only a warning. Outside, Jae-suk caught up with Suk-hoon, who was holding the USB drive that filled with the math exam questions. Unexpectedly, Jae-suk snatched Suk-hoon's phone and demanded all the answers during the exam. The next day, during the test, Jae-suk repeatedly kicked Suk-hoon's chair until he handed over the answer sheet. Ji-hai, who was distributing the exam papers, noticed Jae-suk had 2 answer sheets and demanded to know where the extra one came from. Surprisingly, Jae-suk pointed to Sung-yeol, who had been sitting quietly, trying to avoid attention. After school, Woo Hyun approaches Ji-hai, feeling guilty about Sung-yeol's previous accusation of cheating. Woo Hyun told her that he had seen Jae-suk and Suk-hoon acting suspiciously and suggested that Sung-yeol might have been covering for them despite his injured hand. Ji-hai was shocked by this revelation, and Woo Hyun promised to gather evidence to prove Sung-yeol's innocence. Before leaving, Ji-hai's demeanor softened. She suddenly showed concern for Woo Hyun, asking about his health and advising him to buy allergy and cold medicine. Woo Hyun, surprised by her sudden kindness, thanked her. Later, Woo Hyun was searching for Jae-suk when he stumbled upon a shocking scene. From behind a wall, he saw Jae-suk's father arrive in his car, furious. In a fit of rage, Jae-suk's father nearly hit him with the car and berated him for cheating to get good grades. Humiliated and defeated, Jae-suk stood frozen. Woo Hyun watched the scene unfold, feeling powerless and afraid of being noticed. Later that day, Jae-suk and his friends surrounded Woo Hyun, attacking him viciously and blaming him for their cheating scandal. Despite the pain, Woo Hyun stood firm, refusing to take responsibility for their actions. He demanded that Jae-suk confess the truth. The tense moment took an unexpected turn when Seul-bi called Woo Hyun's phone, and Jae-suk answered instead. Trying to impress Seul-bi, Jae-suk lied to her, but Woo Hyun, knowing the truth was at stake, shouted for her not to come. Alarmed by Woo Hyun's voice, Seul-bi sensed something was wrong and quickly called Sung-yeol for help before rushing to the park. At the park, the situation escalated as Jae-suk races off on his motorcycle, aiming to intimidate Woo Hyun further. Just in time, Seul-bi and Sung-yeol arrived. Seul-bi then used her powers to shut off the motorcycle, stopping Jae-suk in his tracks. However, the effort drained her, and she collapsed from exhaustion. Seeing this, Sung-yeol immediately rushed to her side, ensuring she was safe. With Seul-bi out of harm's way, Sung-yeol turned his attention to Jae-suk and the two got into a fierce fight. The next day, during lunch break, Seul-bi approached Jae-suk, pleading with him to stop tormenting Woo-hyun. Despite his stubbornness, her gentle and kind demeanor softened him. Not only that, she also handed him a band-aid and sincerely urged him not to hurt anyone again. Later that evening, Yina visited Woo-hyun's shop, intending to give him a gift. Instead, she found Woo-hyun and Seul-bi cooking together in the kitchen, sharing an intimate moment. Feeling heartbroken, Yina left, but Seul-bi found her limping outside while taking out the trash. Concerned, Seul-bi stopped to check on her, and the two ended up having conversation. At that moment, Yina confessed her love for Woo-hyun, leaving Seul-bi at a loss for words. When Woo-hyun called Seul-bi shortly after, she hesitated to answer in front of Yina. Later, Woo-hyun noticed Seul-bi limping and, out of concern, handed her his monthly salary, urging her to take care of herself. Seul-bi accepted it, but she felt an unfamiliar ache in her chest. The next day, during the end of sports time, Woo-hyun called out to Seul-bi, but she ignored him and focused on cleaning up the scattered balls. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Ji-hae arrived at a small bar to meet Woo-hyun's grandmother. Desperate, Ji-hae begged her to transfer Woo-hyun to a different school, explaining that her stepson also attended the same school. However, Woo-hyun's grandmother, fully aware of his struggles, became furious. In her anger, she poured a bucket of water over Ji-hae just as she tried to offer her an envelope of money. Later, when Woo-hyun, Seul-bi, and Sung-yeol were heading home, they saw Ji-hae with his grandmother outside the shop. Ji-hae was drenched, holding the envelope that had been returned to her. Concerned, Woo-hyun approached them. Panicked, Woo-hyun's grandmother quickly explained that Ji-hae had accidentally left the envelope behind. She then invited Woo-hyun into the shop, trying to change the subject. Soon after, Ki-soo arrived at the shop and invited Woo-hyun to go cycling at the park the next day. Unbeknownst to him, Ki-soo had been forced by Yina's friend, Young-eun, into setting up a date between Yina and Woo-hyun. Excited by the idea of spending time with friends, Seul-bi suggested they invite Sung-yeol to join them. Back at home, Ji-hae sat quietly, holding a key-shaped necklace in her hand. Memories of her past with Woo-hyun flooded her mind, especially the time she gave him the necklace and promised they would meet again. Overwhelmed by these thoughts, Ji-hae couldn't hold back her tears. The next day, Woo-hyun, Seul-bi, Sung-yeol, Yina, Ki-soo, and Young-eun met at the park for their planned bike ride. As Woo-hyun and Sung-yeol prepared their bikes, Yina pulled Seul-bi aside. She firmly told Seul-bi that she wanted to confess her feelings to Woo-hyun alone and asked her not to interfere. Seul-bi, feeling left out and hurt, quietly stepped back. During the ride, Yina managed to spend time with Woo-hyun and eventually gathered the courage to confess her feelings. Woo-hyun, however, stopped his bike abruptly. Feeling uncomfortable, he gently but firmly rejected her. Without hesitation, he got off his bike and called for Seul-bi to join him, leaving Yina standing there, heartbroken. Yina watched as Woo-hyun walked away with Seul-bi. Her sadness deepened as she realized her feelings were unreciprocated. Seul-bi, confused by the tension, quickly excused herself, leaving an awkward and chaotic atmosphere behind. The next day, word of the incident had spread throughout the school. Woo-hyun was met with cheers and teasing from his friends, while Seul-bi faced whispers and gossip as she walked into the classroom. Fortunately, a teacher arrived and quickly silenced the chatter. Later, after school, Seul-bi went to Woo-hyun's shop but found it closed. While she stood there wondering, Woo-hyun appeared. He explained that his grandmother had gone on vacation. However, it wasn't true as she was actually undergoing chemotherapy at the hospital. Woo-hyun shared that the doctors had advised her to stay in the hospital, but she postponed her admission, claiming she needed to handle something important first. When Woo-hyun tried calling her, she ignored him, clearly preoccupied with her own worries. The next morning, Seul-bi arrived at school early to clean the classroom. As she worked, Sun-bae suddenly appeared, holding an angel book. He urged Seul-bi to sign it, explaining that doing so would allow her to regain her angel status within a week. Seul-bi hesitated, but eventually decided to touch the book, signaling her intent to become an angel again. Before she could fully process her decision, Yina called her, crying in despair over Woo Hyun's rejection. Feeling responsible, Seul-bi met with Yina, listened to her heartbreak, and apologized sincerely. She even bought Yina a drink to comfort her. But as Seul-bi walked away, Yina secretly peeked into her bag. The following day, Yina was panicked and upset, searching frantically through her locker for her missing phone. During this time, Young-eun also joined the search, but the phone was nowhere to be found. Yina then turned to Seul-bi, asking if she had seen it. Seul-bi, genuinely confused, said she didn't remember seeing the phone. At the same time, Jae-suk suddenly exclaimed that there must be a thief among them. The classroom grew tense. Jae-suk's earlier threats had already made many students uneasy, and most had left the room. Meanwhile, Chun-sik quietly slipped his phone into Seul-bi's bag unnoticed. Moments later, Chun-sik nervously raised his hand and told the teacher that his phone and money had been stolen. The teacher, alarmed, ordered everyone to place their bags on the table for inspection. When Seul-bi opened her bag, she was stunned to find an unfamiliar phone inside. Before she could explain, Jae-suk jumped in and accused her of stealing Chun-sik's phone. The teacher then asked Chun-sik to confirm, and he identified the phone as his. As things settled, Yina suddenly announced that her phone was missing too. Suspicion immediately fell on Seul-bi again. The teacher asked her to empty her bag completely. Unexpectedly, Yina's phone and a wallet were discovered inside. Seeing this, Seul-bi protested her innocence, but the teacher led her, Yina, and Chun-sik to the counseling room. Later, Mr. Kim, the school counselor, asked Seul-bi to admit the truth, but she insisted she hadn't stolen anything. Mr. Kim sighed and asked her to reflect on her actions before dismissing the group. After the meeting, Seul-bi approached Yina, hurt and confused. She asked if their friendship had been fake all along. Yina coldly rejected her, pulling her hand away. She admitted that she had never wanted to be friends with Seul-bi. Hearing this, Seul-bi was left heartbroken, struggling to understand the betrayal. Shortly after, Seul-bi wandered aimlessly in the hallway, her thoughts heavy, when Woo Hyun suddenly appeared. Without warning, he grabbed her arm and pulled her into a quiet corner. Seul-bi tried to explain her innocence, but Woo Hyun's doubt lingered, and their conversation quickly turned into a heated argument. Hurt by his distrust, Seul-bi stormed away, leaving him standing alone. In the days that followed, Seul-bi became a target for her classmates' bullying. Garbage was stuffed into her locker, and she endured constant taunts and harassment in class. Watching the cruelty unfold, Woo Hyun grew angrier each day. Tensions reached a boiling point when Jae-suk mocked him, leading to a physical fight. A teacher soon intervened and demanded that all involved bring their parents to school for a meeting the next day. The following morning, Woo Hyun's grandmother, despite her pain, accompanied him to the school meeting. They were surprised to see Woo Jin there, who had come to support Seul-bi. Soon, the parents of the other boys, including Jae-suk's father, arrived. During this time, Woo Hyun's grandmother apologized for the trouble Woo Hyun had caused. Ji-hai also entered the room with her son. However, when Jae-suk's father insulted Woo Hyun and threatened him, Sung-yeol stood up to defend his friend. The teacher stepped in, asking everyone to leave the room. Once outside, Seul-bi found the courage to speak up. She revealed that she had been falsely accused of stealing and had suffered relentless bullying from Jae-suk and his group. Embarrassed by his son's actions, Jae-suk's father promised to discipline him. That evening, Seul-bi sat alone on the rooftop, gazing at the stars with a book in her lap. Suddenly, Woo Hyun appeared, startling her. Flustered, she claimed she was just stargazing. At that moment, they exchanged apologies, and in that quiet moment, they made a heartfelt promise to always trust each other, no matter what. After Woo Hyun left, Sunbae appeared with a grave warning. He told Seul-bi that her presence in the human world was bringing harm to those around her. He urged her to return to heaven before it was too late. The next day at school, Seul-bi stood before her classmates and issued a heartfelt apology. Her words were filled with finality, leaving her classmates confused and shocked by her sudden change in demeanor. Meanwhile, Woo Hyun faced his punishment with determination. To make amends, he wrote 2,000 apologies. At the same time, his grandmother sought out Ji-hai, pleading for her to forgive Woo Hyun and let him pass, revealing that he was her biological son. Ji-hai, overwhelmed by her interference, refused. She explained that she had finally found peace and didn't want her life disrupted. That night, as Woo Hyun's grandmother prepared to leave, Woo Hyun caught her trying to discard her belongings. Realizing her intentions, he hugged her tightly, cherishing the moment. Woo Hyun's grandmother, overwhelmed with emotion, asked him to take a shower, hoping to hide her tears. The next day, Woo Hyun, Seul-bi, and his grandmother went on a picnic. Woo Hyun and Seul-bi laughed and played, but their joy was cut short when Woo Hyun's grandmother collapsed from her illness. Acting quickly, they rushed her to the hospital. At the hospital, Woo Hyun and Seul-bi stayed by her side. When finally regained consciousness, she asked Woo Hyun to retrieve her bag from home, reminding him how much she disliked the hospital's sterile scent. As a result, he left to fulfill her request, leaving Seul-bi to care for her. While on his way, tragedy struck and a phone call alerted Woo Hyun. Acting quickly, he ran back to the hospital with the bag in hand. By the time he arrived, it was too late. His grandmother had passed away. Seul-bi, seeing her spirit leave, chased after it. She pleaded with Sunbae to let Grandma stay a little longer so she could say goodbye, but Sunbae refused. At the funeral, Seul-bi appeared in her angel outfit, knowing it was her last day on Earth. She gave Sung-yeol a meteor stone and a CD, saying it could grant his wish. After saying her goodbyes, Seul-bi prepared to leave. Woo Hyun walked in and, misunderstanding the moment, saw her hugging Sung-yeol. Later, Seul-bi waited for Woo Hyun, but he ignored her, still upset. At the funeral, Woo Hyun said his final goodbye, while Seul-bi, his grandmother, and Sunbae watched from the other side, their expressions filled with sorrow. Before departing, Woo Hyun's grandmother advised Seul-bi to take care of herself and promised to watch over Woo Hyun. With her mission complete, Sunbae came to take her back. Moments later, Seul-bi gazed at Woo Hyun one last time, their time together coming to an end. Walking with Sunbae, Seul-bi suddenly stopped and handed him her black book. Tearfully, she apologized for failing to become an angel again. Sunbae watched her with tears in his eyes as she turned back to Woo Hyun, begging him to cry with her one last time. The next morning, Mr. Yoon was shocked to find Mr. Kim's resignation letter in the teacher's room. Determined to keep the principal from finding out, he fabricated a story, claiming that Mr. Kim was on temporary leave. Taking him at his word, the principal instructed Mr. Yoon to take over as the homeroom teacher in Mr. Kim's absence. That evening, Seul-bi visited Woo Hyun, bringing food to comfort him. Overwhelmed by his sadness, Woo Hyun accidentally spilled the food. At that moment, Seul-bi pushed her own emotions aside and began cleaning up, urging him to stay strong and face his struggles. She admitted feeling helpless, unsure of how else to support him during such a difficult time. The next day, a familiar customer entered Woo Hyun's grandmother's shop, ordering tteokbokki as usual. Seul-bi suddenly recognized the man from a past encounter at the police station. Introducing himself as Sung-gook, he explained that he was once an angel and now served as the chairman of the Human Angel Committee. To convince her, Sung-gook showed her his phone and sent her a message, inviting her to reach out anytime. Before leaving for an urgent matter, he reminded Seul-bi to keep her former angelic identity a secret. Later, Sung-yeol arrived at Woo Hyun's house with food. When Seul-bi checked his bag, she asked if the meal was homemade by his mother. Sung-yeol hesitated, but admitted it was. He then expressed his gratitude for having parents he could still see and talk to, though his tone revealed mixed emotions. That evening, two strangers barged into Woo Hyun's house, claiming they were looking for his father, who owed them money. They caused a scene, revealing that his father had used the shop as collateral for a loan and then disappeared. Furious, Woo Hyun confronted them and kicked them out, knowing he couldn't be held accountable for his father's reckless actions. Angered by the encounter, the men took legal action, dragging Woo Hyun to the police station. They presented a loan agreement, insisting they were within their rights to demand repayment. As tensions escalated, Woo Jin stepped in and defused the situation, asking Sung-yeol to take Woo Hyun home before things got worse. The next day, Seul-bi, desperate to save Woo Hyun's grandmother's shop from being seized, began working multiple part-time jobs. She tried everything from waiting tables to babysitting, but struggled to keep up with the demands and was eventually fired. Undeterred, she kept searching for ways to help. Her luck turned when she spotted a missing dog poster offering a 500,000 won reward. After hours of searching, Seul-bi found the dog in a dump. However, her relief was short-lived when two debt collectors confronted her, demanding payment for Woo Hyun's father's debt. Acting quickly, Seul-bi handed over her reward money, but it wasn't enough. One of the thugs then grabbed her face and threatened her until Woo Hyun arrived and intervened. Frustrated, Woo Hyun pushed Seul-bi aside, only for Seul-bi to retaliate by throwing a pot at him in anger. The next day, Chun-sik left the teacher's room and was confronted by Yi-na. At that moment, he confessed that he had planted his phone in Seul-bi's bag. Yi-na then asked if he was afraid of Jae-suk, and Chun-sik admitted he was, but declared he was done being a coward. With newfound resolve, he walked away from her. Later, in the classroom, Woo Hyun and Seul-bi entered together. Yi-na greeted Woo Hyun, but he ignored her, leaving her upset. Determined to make amends, Yi-na began typing a message to Woo Hyun, confessing that she was the one who had planted her phone in Seul-bi's bag. Before she could finish, Young-eun grabbed her phone and exposed her plan, creating a tension in the room. When Mr. Yoon entered the classroom, Young-eun, clearly upset with Yi-na, accused her of planting the phone in Seul-bi's bag to frame her. Mr. Yoon quickly took control of the situation, asking everyone to place their bags on the table and rearranging the seating chart. As a result, Woo Hyun ended up sitting with Yi-na, while Seul-bi was paired with Sung Yeol. During the break, Seul-bi went to the library to find a book about angels. Woo Hyun noticed her struggling and offered to help. On a shelf, he spotted a book titled All Things About Angels Who Have Become Humans. As Seul-bi reached for the book, it suddenly fell to the ground, startling her. Suspicious, she confronted Seul-bi, accusing him of causing the book to fall. She reminded him that angels were meant to save people, not harm them. Instead of responding, Seul-bi disappeared, leaving Woo Hyun surprised to learn that Seul-bi was actually an angel. Curious, Woo Hyun returned to the library later and began reading the book Seul-bi had taken. As he read, memories of the time Seul-bi saved him from falling off a roof flooded back. While he was lost in thought, Sung-guk appeared and dropped a stack of books in front of him. Sung-guk warned Woo Hyun to keep quiet about what he had learned. Suddenly, Seul-bi appeared, using his powers. Sung-guk quickly intervened, confronting Seul-bi and urging him to leave. Outside the library, Sung-guk revealed to Seul-bi that he was the first angel to become human. Frustrated, he asked if Seul-bi was jealous of Seul-bi's closeness to humans. Seul-bi firmly denied it, dismissing humans as insignificant creatures. Sung-guk, unfazed, demanded that Seul-bi stop interfering in Seul-bi's life. Later, Woo Hyun devised a secret plan to hide Seul-bi's angel dress, knowing that without it, she couldn't leave. He carefully stored the dress in a box in his room. Meanwhile, Sung Yeol, feeling upset after learning that his biological mother had remarried, wandered aimlessly, refusing to go home. On his way, Sung Yeol encountered Woo Hyun and Seul-bi, who immediately noticed something was amiss. They invited him to spend the night at Woo Hyun's place. That evening, Sung Yeol finally opened up, sharing that his mother had gotten married again, leaving him feeling emotionally unsettled. Woo Hyun empathized and gave him space. Later that night, Woo Hyun visited the police station to inform Woo Jin that Sung Yeol was staying with him. While Woo Hyun was away, Sung Yeol took the opportunity to confess his love to Seul-bi, despite knowing her heart belonged to Woo Hyun. He promised to wait for her, leaving Seul-bi confused and unsure of how to respond. At dinner, Woo Hyun and Sung Yeol got into an argument. When Seul-bi asked what was going on, both denied anything had happened, but she could sense tension between them. During school vacation, Seul-bi invited Woo Hyun and Sung Yeol to a sauna. They enjoyed their time until they unexpectedly ran into Woo Hyun's father and Sung Yeol's mother outside. While the adults talked, Seul-bi and Woo Hyun stayed in the sauna room. At that moment, Seul-bi grew sad watching the reunion, realizing that Woo Hyun had been abandoned by his parents since childhood. When she expressed her sympathy, Woo Hyun admitted that he considered himself without parents. Before she could reveal her true identity as an angel, Woo Hyun kissed her, leaving her speechless. Sung-yeol, seeing the kiss from a distance, was heartbroken. When Woo-jin suggested they bathe together, Sung-yeol silently walked away, his expression blank. The next day, Seul-bi was surprised to see Sung-yeol at school. He seemed distant, ignoring her attempts to talk. Even Woo-hyun noticed something was wrong and grew concerned. During sports class, Sung-yeol unexpectedly threw a ball with great force, hitting Woo-hyun in the stomach and causing him to collapse in pain. As a result, Seul-bi and Ki-soo rushed to help Woo-hyun, but she was stunned to see that Sung-yeol was the one who hurt him. They escorted Woo-hyun to the treatment room, with Sung-yeol silently following behind. As they headed to the treatment room, Ji-hae walked by and noticed Woo-hyun clutching his stomach in pain. Ki-soo quickly explained that Sung-yeol had thrown the ball at him. Furious, Ji-hae scolded Sung-yeol harshly, her voice echoing through the hallway. Everyone was stunned by her sudden outburst. Realizing she had overreacted, Ji-hae composed herself and apologized to Sung-yeol before walking away. During lunch break, Yina approached Young-eun and her friends, attempting to reconcile. However, they coldly ignored her and walked off, leaving her frustrated and humiliated. Overcome with anger, Yina lashed out by pushing Seul-bi down the stairs. Sung-yeol witnessed the incident and immediately assumed Young-eun was responsible, but she denied it and went to find Yina. When Young-eun confronted Yina, she made it clear that she had never told Yina to harm Seul-bi. Moments later, Woo-hyun joined them. He firmly told Yina that he had never been interested in her and never would be. His words stung deeply, and after warning her to stay away from him, he left with Young-eun. Left alone, Yina broke down, finally realizing the truth of her unrequited feelings. That evening, Sung-yeol couldn't stop thinking about Seul-bi and Woo-hyun's relationship. While folding his clothes, Ji-hae entered the room and was surprised to see him there. Thinking on his feet, Sung-yeol explained that he planned to stay at Woo-hyun's house for a few days. Understanding that he was worried about Seul-bi, Ji-hae reluctantly agreed. Feeling grateful, Sung-yeol thanked Ji-hae and asked if she could pack some of her homemade food for Woo-hyun, knowing how much he loved it. However, when Sung-yeol arrived at Woo-hyun's house, his attempt to make peace was met with problem. Despite bringing the food as an offering, Woo-hyun was still angry with him. Even Sung-yeol's joke about the food being room rent only made things worse. Later, Seul-bi accompanied Sung-yeol to retrieve his belongings from his old home. Meanwhile, Yina approached Woo-hyun to apologize for her earlier behavior, but he dismissed her apology. Desperate, Yina hugged Woo-hyun just as Sung-yeol and Seul-bi arrived outside. Worried about how Seul-bi would feel, Sung-yeol tried to stop her from entering, but she saw what was happening. Sung-yeol gently asked Seul-bi to leave with him. As they walked away, Woo-hyun noticed them from inside. Sung-yeol tried to explain that it might have been a misunderstanding, but Seul-bi refused to dwell on it. She knew that misunderstandings could create bigger problems and wanted to address them calmly. However, Sung-yeol couldn't shake the sadness of knowing her unwavering trust in Woo-hyun left no room for him. Back at home, Woo-hyun reminded Seul-bi of their promise to trust each other no matter what. But Seul-bi, still upset, left without saying much, her face clouded with frustration. That night, Sung-yeol noticed Woo-hyun holding a necklace. When he asked about it, Woo-hyun explained it was a key-shaped necklace his mother had given him as a child. She had a matching lock necklace, and they had promised to stay connected no matter how far apart they were. As Woo-hyun fell asleep, Sung-yeol lay awake, clinging to the hope that Seul-bi might one day return his feelings. Yet deep down, he knew she only saw him as a friend, someone she and Woo-hyun both trusted. One day at school, Sung-yeol was with Ji-hae when he suddenly admitted he wanted to transfer to a different school. He hoped that leaving would help him move on from Seul-bi. Ji-hae, holding his hand, understood how deeply he cared for her. Wishing him well, she encouraged him to do what he needed to heal. That night, Seul-bi met Sung-guk at a cozy cafe. Sung-guk revealed that everyone in the cafe had once been angels who had become human. Taking her hand, he left a strange mark on her wrist. Before Seul-bi could fully grasp its meaning, Jae-suk and his friends, standing outside the cafe window, saw everything unfold. On the other hand, Woo-hyun was seen distributing flyers, when he received a call from Jae-suk that left him panicked. Realizing Seul-bi might be in danger, he immediately ran to find her. On her way home, Seul-bi was cornered by Jae-suk and his friends, who snatched the envelope she was carrying. Luckily, Woo-hyun arrived just in time to intervene. Amid the chaos, Woo-hyun noticed Sung-guk nearby and recalled their encounter at the library, where Sung-guk had urged him to keep quiet about what he knew. Moments later, Mr. Yoon arrived, causing Jae-suk and his gang to scatter. Elsewhere, Sung Yeol was searching for his father's lost wallet when he stumbled upon Ji-hai's padlock necklace. The discovery made him suspicious, and he hurried to Woo-hyun's house to investigate. Meanwhile, Seul-bi found an envelope from Suk-hoon containing a dire warning. If a human touched a certain symbol, she would disappear completely from the world, and even from human memory. The thought of Woo-hyun forgetting her entirely filled her with dread. Sung Yeol arrived at Woo-hyun's house shortly after. He asked Seul-bi where Woo-hyun was, and she told him he was taking a bath. Unexpectedly, Sung Yeol went to Woo-hyun's room, where he matched Ji-hai's necklace with his own. The realization hit him, understanding that Woo-hyun was Ji-hai's son. When Woo-hyun returned and asked why Sung Yeol was in his room, Sung Yeol shoved him in frustration and left without explaining. The next day, Sung Yeol skipped school and joined Jae-suk's gang at an internet cafe. However, things turned violent when they lured him beneath a bridge and began to attack him. Just as the situation grew dire, Seul-bi appeared. When Jae-suk tried to strike her, his friends stopped him, saying they didn't harm women or children. Though badly injured, Sung Yeol tried to reason with Jae-suk, but Seul-bi intervened, hugging him tightly from behind and begging him to stop. Jae-suk, seizing the moment, snapped a photo of the embrace and sent it to Woo-hyun. When Woo-hyun arrived, he was furious to see Seul-bi embracing Sung Yeol. In his anger, he shoved Sung Yeol to the ground and told Seul-bi to leave immediately. That evening, Ji-hai frantically searched the house for her lost necklace. Sung Yeol, observing her desperation, admitted he had thrown it away. Despite his confession, Ji-hai ran outside to the garbage bin to retrieve it. As she dug through the trash, Sung Yeol approached her, holding the necklace. Confronting her, he demanded to know if Woo-hyun was her son. Ji-hai tried to explain, but Sung Yeol, overcome with anger, told her to leave his family for good. Heartbroken, Sung Yeol went to the school gym to vent his frustration by playing basketball. Meanwhile, Jae-suk took Sung Yeol's phone and sent a message to Seul-bi, luring her to the gym by claiming Sung Yeol was trapped. When Sung Yeol finished, he saw Jae-suk's message and raced to the gym, where he found Seul-bi locked in the sports warehouse. At the same time, Woo-hyun searched desperately for her. When Seul-bi finally appeared before him, the mark on her hand began to glow brightly. The following day, Ji-hai visited Woo-hyun's grandmother's grave. She tearfully apologized for being late and revealed the truth to Woo-hyun that she was his biological mother. Overhearing her confession, Woo-hyun was consumed with anger. He coldly cut her off, declaring that he had no parents and ordered her to leave his life. That night, Woo-hyun met Sung Yeol under the dim streetlights. He told Sung Yeol that he didn't need a mother and was leaving Ji-hai to him. As Woo-hyun turned to leave, Sung Yeol's voice cut through the silence. He said that Woo-hyun, just like his mother, who's ambitious and driven. Without waiting for a response, Sung Yeol walked away, leaving Woo-hyun standing alone. Meanwhile, Seul-bi was tidying up Woo-hyun's room when she found a key necklace hidden among his belongings. She froze, recognizing it as something deeply precious to him. Saddened by the discovery, she placed the necklace in a drawer, her heart heavy with the knowledge of the growing rift between Woo-hyun and Sung Yeol. Elsewhere, Ji-hai approached Woo-hyun with an envelope of money his grandmother had left for him. She told him that what he needed now was money since he had lost everything else. Woo-hyun, unable to hold back his frustration, revealed how he had searched for his biological mother, only to find that she had become the mother of his best friend. Feeling betrayed, Woo-hyun sent her away. Ji-hai begged him for a hug, but he turned her down and walked off. Seul-bi, who had overheard their conversation, felt helpless, unsure of how to comfort him. During an ethics class the next day, Sung Yeol asked a provocative question. What did Ji-hai and Seul-bi think of a mother who abandoned her child? Hearing this, Ji-hai answered cautiously, but suddenly leaving the class abruptly, clearly unsettled. Woo-hyun glared at Sung-yeol, frustrated by his behavior. Later, on the school rooftop, Woo-hyun confronted Sung-yeol, said that their friendship was more important than his biological mother. As their argument escalated, Sung-yeol backed dangerously close to the edge of the building, hinting about doing the unthinkable. Woo-hyun, panicking, pleaded with him to stop. At the same time, Seul-bi ran toward the rooftop, but was blocked by a pile of chairs that suddenly fell in her path. She spotted Sun-bae in the distance, his eyes cold as he deliberately obstructed her. With no other choice, Seul-bi used her powers to save Sung-yeol. Seeing her powers in action, Woo-hyun immediately rushed toward her, breaking the tension. Ji-hai seized the moment to pull Sung-yeol back to safety from the edge. After the rooftop incident, Ji-hai invited Seul-bi to a cafe. Over coffee, she suggested that Seul-bi move in with her to stop the rumors about her living with Woo-hyun. At that moment, Seul-bi hesitated but asked for time to consider the offer. The next day at school, Seul-bi couldn't shake Ji-hai's words. She reflected on how close she, Woo-hyun, and Sung-yeol used to be. Their bond had fractured, and living with Woo-hyun seemed to create more problems than she wanted to cause. That afternoon, Seul-bi placed a padlock on a flower pot in front of the house, handing Woo-hyun the key, and said that her heart will always be there, even she leave the house. Woo-hyun, confused, asked what she meant. However, Seul-bi explained that she had decided to live with Ji-hai to avoid any more rumors about their arrangement. After a moment of thought, Woo-hyun reluctantly agreed, understanding her reasoning. The next morning, Seul-bi woke up feeling ill, but forced herself to get ready for school, desperate to see Woo-hyun. Sung-yeol noticed her pale face and urged her to stay home, but she insisted on going. Frustrated by her stubbornness, Sung-yeol locked her in a room, refusing to let her leave until she recovered. Seul-bi, feeling trapped, sat alone in frustration. At school, Woo-hyun waited eagerly for Seul-bi. When Sung-yeol arrived instead, Woo-hyun's patience snapped. He demanded to know where Seul-bi was, and Sung-yeol told him she was too sick to come to school. Overcome with anger, Woo-hyun shoved Seul-bi's phone into Sung-yeol's hand and stormed off. Sung-yeol teased him, but Woo-hyun ignored him, walking away feeling lost without Seul-bi by his side. As Ji-hai returned home, she noticed Sung-yeol rushing past her, his face tense and distracted. He seemed so preoccupied that he didn't even acknowledge her presence. Later, it was revealed that Jae-suk had secretly taken a photo of Ji-hai and Sung-yeol together and shown it to Woo-hyun, hoping to unravel the truth about their relationships. Woo-hyun, however, brushed off his probing questions with a joke, which only made Jae-suk more suspicious. Meanwhile, Woo-jin was furious with Ji-hai for keeping the truth about being Woo-hyun's mother a secret. He felt betrayed, especially since he had always been honest with her. Ji-hai tried to explain her reasons, but Woo-jin was too upset to listen. As their argument grew louder, Seul-bi overheard it from her room. Concerned, she stepped out and caught snippets of their heated exchange. Soon after, there was a knock at the door, and Seul-bi opened it to find Woo-hyun standing there with a bag. Inside, Ji-hai, Woo-jin, and Sung-yeol were already present. Without hesitation, Woo-hyun invited Woo-jin to stay, but Sung-yeol, irritated by Woo-hyun's presence, threatened to leave if he didn't go. Despite Ji-hai's protests, Sung-yeol stormed out, leaving her visibly upset. Woo-jin, trying to mediate, told Woo-hyun he could stay before leaving to chase after Sung-yeol. Woo-jin caught up with Sung-yeol at a roadside stand where they sat down for drinks. There, Woo-jin asked why Sung-yeol hadn't told him that Woo-hyun was Ji-hai's son. At that moment, Sung-yeol admitted that he didn't want to hurt his father by revealing such a painful truth. Realizing his mistake, Woo-jin apologized for misunderstanding Sung-yeol's intentions. The next day, during class, Jae-suk publicly questioned Ji-hai about why Sung-yeol and Seul-bi were living in her house. Ji-hai was caught off guard but eventually admitted that Sung-yeol was her son. The revelation caused a stir among the students, with whispers spreading across the room. After school, Sung-yeol and Seul-bi were at the park when a small child accidentally bumped into Sung-yeol. As a result, Seul-bi bent down to help the child and gently stroked their head. Unexpectedly, the symbol on her wrist began to glow faintly. Back at home, Sung-yeol couldn't shake the image of the symbol. He sketched it in his notebook, and to his astonishment, the drawing emitted a bright light. Intrigued and suspicious, he sneaked into Seul-bi's room later that night, causing her to worry that he was getting too close to discovering her secret. The following morning, Sung-yeol's curiosity got the better of him. He directly asked Seul-bi about the glowing symbol on her wrist. Seul-bi remained silent, fearful that revealing the truth would erase her memories with everyone. Suddenly, the symbol glowed brightly again, and Woo Hyun appeared just in time to intervene. He covered Sung-yeol's mouth and urged him to stay quiet, giving Seul-bi a chance to escape. Once she was gone, Woo Hyun turned to Sung-yeol, his anger boiling over. He threatened to beat him up if he ever did something like that again. At school, Sung-yeol cornered Woo Hyun for a private conversation, still desperate to know Seul-bi's secret. Woo Hyun, however, refused to explain and urged him to drop the matter for good. Meanwhile, in the broadcast room, Seul-bi, out of curiosity, accidentally activated the school's speakers, transmitting a private conversation between Woo Hyun and Sung-yeol to the entire school. Taking advantage of the situation, Sung-yeol used the opportunity to reveal that Ji-hai was Woo Hyun's biological mother who had abandoned him as a child. The revelation echoed through the school, leaving everyone stunned. After saying the truth, Sung-yeol walked out of the room without looking back. The next day at school, chaos erupted outside Ji-hai's car as angry parents gathered to confront her about her relationship with Woo Hyun. Tensions were high, but Woo Hyun and Seul-bi managed to guide Ji-hai away from the crowd safely. However, the conflict didn't end there. At home, Woo Jin expressed regret for letting Woo Hyun stay with him, blaming him for Sung-yeol's pain. Ji-hai, deeply upset, firmly declared that she would never abandon her son again and vowed to protect him no matter what. Woo Hyun overheard their heated argument from another room, feeling deeply hurt and isolated. The following day, the parents continued demanding Ji-hai's removal from the school. In response, Seul-bi and her friends distributed petitions to all the students, asking them to support Ji-hai's right to stay. Surprisingly, even Jae-suk filled out a form, signaling his support. Meanwhile, Sung-yeol was reading quietly in his room when Ji-hai entered to apologize and ask for his forgiveness. Instead of responding, Sung-yeol grabbed her lock necklace and stormed out. Ji-hai followed, begging him to return it, but before she could retrieve it, Woo Hyun and Seul-bi arrived just in time to witness Sung-yeol push Ji-hai, causing the necklace to break. This was the breaking point for Woo Hyun, who lost his temper and lunged towards Sung-yeol, ready to strike. Woo Jin intervened, demanding that Woo Hyun leave his house immediately. With no other choice, Woo Hyun, Seul-bi, and Ji-hai returned to his grandmother's house. Ji-hai was moved to tears when she found an old childhood photo of Woo Hyun in the room. Seul-bi comforted her, expressing her hope that Woo Hyun and Sung-yeol could eventually mend their friendship. The next day, during an impromptu exam, chaos ensued when the exam papers mysteriously disappeared and reappeared. Seul-bi suspected Seul-bi was behind the strange events. After the exam, the last paper vanished again, prompting Jae-suk to accuse Seul-bi of taking it. However, Ji-hai soon found the missing sheet on the teacher's desk and led Seul-bi out of the classroom. Inside the teacher's room, Ji-hai accidentally left the exam sheet unattended on her desk. Unbeknownst to her, a student overheard her conversation with Mr. Yoon. Rumors quickly spread, falsely blaming Seul-bi for losing the exam sheet. Feeling targeted, Seul-bi became isolated until Sung-yeol came to her defense, pulling her away from the crowd. Woo Hyun watched from a distance, torn between frustration and guilt. That evening, Woo Hyun decided to make peace with Sung-yeol and invited him to meet at the park. There, he made an unexpected request. He asked Sung-yeol to let Seul-bi stay at his house instead of returning to Woo Hyun's. Though his heart ached at the thought of letting her go, Woo Hyun believed it was the right choice to protect her. Later, back at the shop, Woo Hyun gathered his courage and told Seul-bi that she should live with Sung-yeol. Though she tried to hide her pain, Seul-bi was heartbroken by his decision. That night, Seul-bi left Woo Hyun's house with her suitcase. Sung Yeol met her outside, kindly taking her bag. As they walked away together, Woo Hyun stood alone, tears streaming down his face. The next day at school, Seul-bi overheard Ji-hai worrying about the missing exam sheet. Determined to clear her name, Seul-bi searched the school and eventually found torn pieces of the test sheet scattered in the gymnasium. As she began collecting them, Sunbae appeared and urged her to abandon her human life and return to being an angel. Seul-bi ignored his plea, focusing instead on piecing together the torn sheets. That night, Seul-bi worked tirelessly to piece the torn exam sheets back together. Her hands moved carefully as she tried to align the pieces, but exhaustion eventually overcame her, and she fell asleep at the desk. Meanwhile, Woo Hyun, who had been searching for her, found her asleep in the classroom. Without waking her, he quietly sat beside her and began helping with the sheets. When Seul-bi woke up and saw Woo Hyun, her heart swelled with emotion. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized how much he truly cared for her. The next day, Seul-bi returned the reconstructed exam sheet to Ji-hai, explaining that she had found it and done her best to restore it. Ji-hai, intrigued and suspicious, pressed Seul-bi to reveal what secrets she was hiding. Seul-bi hesitated, but before she could answer, Sung Yeol appeared and urged Ji-hai to let the matter go. Later, as Seul-bi and Sung Yeol walked home together, Seul-bi received a message from Ki-soo saying that Woo Hyun was sick. Alarmed, she immediately rushed to Woo Hyun's house. However, as they arrived, Sung Yeol stopped Seul-bi from entering, rudely brushing her hand away. The force caused Seul-bi to faint, leaving Sung Yeol stunned. Inside the house, Woo Hyun seemed fine at first as he descended the stairs. But suddenly he clutched his chest, collapsing in pain. Despite his agony, he struggled to crawl toward the door. When Ji-hai arrived home, she was horrified to find Woo Hyun lying unconscious on the floor. She quickly carried him to her room, her mind racing with memories of their past. As Ji-hai looked at Woo Hyun's face, a vivid memory resurfaced. She recalled a day when she and Woo Hyun had gone swimming. Distracted by her cell phone, she hadn't noticed Woo Hyun struggling in the water until it was too late. When she finally realized he was drowning, it was Seul-bi who had intervened, knocking the phone out of her hand to draw her attention. Startled, Ji-hai had leaped into the water to save her son. Back in the present, Sung-guk and Mr. Yoon visited the library and stumbled upon Woo Hyun. Sung-guk pulled Woo Hyun aside for a private conversation. He asked Woo Hyun why he was searching for him, noting that the symbol on Seul-bi's wrist was glowing brighter. Woo Hyun, taken aback that Sung-guk knew without being told, explained that the students had grown suspicious of Seul-bi, and her mark was becoming more visible. As a result, Sung-guk warned him to wait for the symbol to fade, or Seul-bi might disappear completely. Later, the students went on a field trip to a television broadcast building. After the briefing, Seul-bi didn't seem like herself and slipped away to the restroom. Woo Hyun and Sung Yeol waited for her outside. When she emerged, Woo Hyun quickly gathered the students, except for Jae-suk, Seul-bi, and Sung Yeol. Meanwhile, Jue handed out leaflets explaining Seul-bi's true identity as an angel. The leaflet included instructions for what to do if her wrist symbol glowed. Students were to close their eyes and pretend not to see it. As the leaflets spread, understanding began to replace confusion, and the students shared them with others. In the garden, Jae-suk found Seul-bi sitting weakly on a bench. Concerned, he reached out to help her, but as he touched her, the symbol on her wrist glowed brightly. A strange energy coursed through his body, leaving him startled and disoriented. Before he could process what was happening, Sung Yeol arrived and pulled him away forcefully. Sung Yeol revealed that it was all part of Sunbi's plan, leaving Jae-suk shocked and Seul-bi even more vulnerable. Sunbae, enraged by Sung Yeol's interference, decided to use his powers to eliminate Seul-bi. In an instant, Seul-bi vanished. Furious, Sung Yeol turned on Jae-suk, grabbing him by the collar and demanding he find Seul-bi immediately. The news of Seul-bi's disappearance spread quickly. Woo Hyun and Sung Yeol frantically searched for her, unaware that Sunbae had moved her to an isolated warehouse. There, he tried to force her to return to being an angel. Just as Seul-bi was about to use his powers, he heard Woo Hyun's voice echoing from a television broadcast. Holding his aching chest, Woo Hyun poured out his heart, expressing his deepest feelings for Seul-bi. Those watching the broadcast felt the weight of his words. Unexpectedly, Seul-bi appeared and pointed his hand at the TV screen, attempting to intervene, but his powers failed. Sung-guk stopped him by grabbing his arm and sternly telling him to leave. Meanwhile, Woo Hyun, overcome with emotion, cried, fearing he had lost Seul-bi forever. However, Seul-bi suddenly appeared from behind and hugged him tightly, bringing tears of relief to him. Back at the building, Seul-bi and Woo Hyun were welcomed warmly by their friends. Ju then handed Seul-bi a ribbon for her wrist, and to her surprise, all her friends had tied similar ribbons on their wrists as a sign of solidarity to protect her secret. At that moment, Woo Hyun lovingly tied the ribbon on Seul-bi's wrist, and she returned the gesture by tying one on his. Later, Sung-yeol sat alone in his room, lost in thought. He recalled the moment Seul-bi hugged Woo Hyun from behind. Realizing he needed to let her go, Sung-yeol decided to give up on Seul-bi and encouraged her to return to Woo Hyun. He then carried her bag out of the house, leaned against the door, and watched as she left to rejoin Woo Hyun. That evening, Seul-bi waited outside Woo Jin's house, anxiously hoping for his return. Suddenly, Jae-suk confronted her with the leaflets exposing her secret. Angry and feeling betrayed, he cornered her against the door, demanding answers. Seul-bi, desperate, knocked on the door and called for Sung-yeol, but he was sound asleep. Weakened, Seul-bi collapsed to the ground. As Jae-suk reached out to touch her, a bright light erupted from her body, knocking him backward. The next day, Woo Hyun approached Jae-suk and begged him not to reveal Seul-bi's secret. He admitted that he couldn't bear to lose her, as she was his only source of happiness. Jae-suk, surprisingly, didn't respond. Instead, he appeared deep in thought, reflecting on Woo Hyun's heartfelt words. One day, while Woo Hyun, Seul-bi, and Sung-yeol were walking together, Woo Hyun suddenly stopped and playfully claimed Sung-yeol as his elder brother since he was born first. Sung-yeol was stunned, but before he could react, Woo Hyun pulled him into a tight hug. When Sung-yeol tried to push him away, Woo Hyun quickly ducked behind Seul-bi for protection, lightening the mood. Later, Woo Hyun and Seul-bi sat together in the garden. Woo Hyun revealed his mother's lock necklace, a cherished memory of his childhood. Seul-bi then brought out the key necklace he had discarded earlier. Seeing this, Woo Hyun placed the lock necklace around Seul-bi's neck and wore the key necklace himself, symbolizing their unbreakable bond and their promise to always stay connected. The next day, Sung-yeol began packing his belongings, preparing to leave. He realized his feelings for Seul-bi were growing stronger and knew he couldn't stay near her anymore, as her heart belonged to Woo Hyun. That night, when Seul-bi learned that Sung-yeol had left home, she immediately asked Woo Hyun to help find him. As Sung-yeol crossed a road, Seul-bi used his powers to move a truck toward him in an attempt to harm him. Just in time, Woo Hyun and Seul-bi arrived to save Sung-yeol. However, Woo Hyun was injured in the process and rushed to the hospital. At the hospital, Woo Hyun checked on Sung-yeol, who was being treated for minor injuries. But his relief turned to devastation when Ji-hae revealed that Seul-bi had vanished without a trace. 2 years passed, and on a rainy afternoon, Woo Hyun is seen seeking shelter from the downpour. As he watched the rain, a girl appeared beside him, holding an umbrella. Woo Hyun's heart skipped a beat when he noticed she was wearing a necklace identical to Seul-bi's. Before he could say anything, the girl quickly walked away, her face obscured by the umbrella. Woo Hyun stood frozen, staring after her as she disappeared into the distance, his heart filled with unanswered questions. Meanwhile, Sung-yeol sat at a cafe with a woman, but his lack of interest was evident. As he prepared to leave, a waitress approached to apologize for a mistake. Sung-yeol, already on his way out, didn't notice that the waitress was Seul-bi, now living a different life. Later that night, Woo Hyun found a drunk Sung-yeol and helped him back to his house. Unbeknownst to them, Seul-bi silently walked alongside them. When they arrived at the house, Seul-bi paused in front of a tteokbokki shop and noticed a job posting in the window. She stared at it for a long moment, her thoughts distant and unreadable. The next day, Woojin was stunned to see Seul-bi walk into the shop to apply for the job. Her calm demeanor and lack of recognition baffled him. She had no memory of her past life. Despite his shock, Woojin hired her on the spot. When Woo Hyun returned home later and saw Seul-bi, he was overjoyed, rushing to greet her. But Seul-bi, confused by his excitement, pushed him away. Woo Hyun's heart broke when he realized she had forgotten him. As tears streamed down his face, Seul-bi instinctively wiped them away. In that moment, faint glimpses of her lost memories began to resurface, leaving her disoriented and shaken. That evening, Woo Hyun offered to drive Seul-bi home. When they reached her house, he extended his hand to introduce himself. Seul-bi shook his hand hesitantly, introducing herself as well. Before their conversation could deepen, Sunbae stepped outside and called Seul-bi in. Sunbae explained that he was now her brother, adding another layer to Woo Hyun's confusion. Determined to understand, Woo Hyun sought out Sung-guk for answers. Not long after, Sung-guk explained everything. Seul-bi was an angel who had become human. It was revealed that 2 years ago, she had sacrificed herself to save Woo Hyun, and as a result, she had lost her memories. As a result, Sung-guk expressed hope that Woo Hyun's love could help her regain her memories faster. Soon after, Woo Hyun visited Sunbae at his home. The two sat in the garden, and Woo Hyun noticed Sunbae packing a bag. Curious, Woo Hyun asked if he was leaving. Sunbae confirmed he was, saying he was entrusting Seul-bi to Woo Hyun. Before parting, Sunbae shared that true love has the power to rekindle lost memories. When Seul-bi returned from work, Woo Hyun suddenly appeared by her side. As they crossed the street together, a car came speeding toward them. Without hesitation, Woo Hyun pulled Seul-bi out of harm's way, shielding her from danger. Though she was unharmed, the incident left Seul-bi confused and shaken. Woo Hyun, quietly ensuring her safety, walked away. Later that night, Seul-bi trudged home, her steps heavy with emotion. Tears rolled down her cheeks as memories of her past life with Woo Hyun flooded her mind. By the time she reached home, her recollections had fully returned. Unaware of her regained memories, Woo Hyun urged her to rest. Just as he turned to leave, Seul-bi called out to him, apologizing for forgetting their memories. Woo Hyun froze, and then, unable to contain his joy, turned and embraced her tightly. Relief and happiness washed over him as he realized the Seul-bi he had loved and missed was finally back. So the moral of the story is, when life gives you glowing symbols and dramatic friends, just focus on eating snacks and minding your business. Also, avoid love triangles. They're bad for your health and your friendships.